Pam Hupp.
I got my gun, turned around, got my gun, nightstand right there, and he was pounding on the door, and once it flew open, that's when I shot him. And I just kept shooting him, and he just kept standing there.
In December 2011, Pamela Marie Hupp drove her friend Elizabeth Betsy Faria home from chemotherapy in Troy, Missouri. Betsy, battling terminal illness, trusted Hupp completely. That trust would prove fatal. What happened next exposed a calculated scheme involving insurance money, staged crime scenes, and a wrongful conviction that shattered an innocent man's life. Hupp stabbed Betsy 55 times in her home, creating a brutal scene designed to look like someone else's work. Days before her death, Betsy had changed her $150,000 life insurance policy to name Hupp as beneficiary instead of her daughter's. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was part of Hupp's plan. Hupp staged the scene to implicate Betsy's husband, Russ, planting evidence and providing testimony that led to his wrongful conviction in 2013. Russ spent years in prison for his wife's death, maintaining his innocence while the real perpetrator remained free. The justice system had failed spectacularly, accepting Hupp's lies as truth. What finally exposed her deception? In 2015, new evidence emerged pointing to Hupp's involvement, leading to Russ's exoneration. The evidence that freed him included cell phone data and financial records showing Hupp's movements and motives. Investigators realized they had convicted the wrong person, while the actual perpetrator walked free, collecting insurance money she'd obtained through deception. But Hupp's crimes didn't end with Betsy's death. In 2016, she lured Louis Gumpenberger, a disabled man, with a fabricated story about working for a television producer. She promised him money to participate in a supposed TV segment. Instead, she shot him in her home, planting evidence to make it appear he was attacking her as part of a plot orchestrated by Russ Faria. Cell phone data and sequential dollar bills linked Hupp to Gumpenberger's setup. The bills she'd withdrawn to plant on Gumpenberger as evidence came in sequence, tracing directly to her bank transactions. The staged scene fell apart under investigation, revealing her attempt to reinforce the frame-up of Russ Faria by making it appear he'd hired someone to attack her. In 2019, Hupp entered an Alford plea for Gumpenberger's death, neither admitting guilt nor proclaiming innocence, but acknowledging the evidence against her was sufficient for conviction. She received life in prison without possibility of parole. The plea allowed her to avoid trial while accepting consequences. For Betsy Faria's stabbing, Hupp was formally charged in 2021. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, reflecting the calculated nature of her crime. Her trial is scheduled for 2026, delayed by various legal proceedings and evidence disputes. DNA evidence debates continue as defense attorneys explore arguments for the upcoming trial. Another suspicious death surrounds Hupp. In 2013, her mother Shirley died from a fall in circumstances investigators found questionable. The death was ruled accidental, but questions remain about Hupp's presence and potential financial motives involving insurance. The pattern of deaths around Hupp involving insurance money raised red flags that weren't fully investigated at the time. Prosecutor Mike Wood described the case as showing depravity not regularly seen, emphasizing the calculated manipulation involved. Hupp's background in insurance sales, where she'd been terminated for forgery, provided skills she weaponized to exploit life insurance policies. Her understanding of the system allowed her to orchestrate schemes that initially fooled investigators. Betsy's daughters noted that Hupp had claimed physical inability to commit such acts, but evidence disproved these assertions. The 55 stab wounds required significant physical effort, contradicting Hupp's portrayal of herself as too weak to have committed such violence. Her lies extended to every aspect of the case. Hupp remains incarcerated at Chillicothe Correctional Center in Missouri, serving her life sentence for Gumpenberger's death while awaiting trial for Betsy's stabbing. she has shown no remorse for her actions, maintaining various stories depending on which served her interests at any moment. The next case would involve horrors discovered in a freezer. Mitchell Blair.
Rape is the worst thing you can do. Just make you. I tell her all the time. They used to make me feel like I was nothing. It made me feel like I wasn't. You turn around and you do that to my son, you knew exactly what she was doing to him. She knew exactly what the she was doing to him. So yeah, I don't care what anybody think. She had to go, period.
In March 2015, Wayne County deputies in Detroit arrived to evict Mitchell Blair from her home for unpaid rent. During the eviction process, they discovered something that would shock even experienced law enforcement officers. Inside a deep freezer in Blair's living room, they found the bodies of two of her offspring who had been missing for years. Stephen Barry and Stoney Blair had been dead for months, their remains preserved in the freezer while their surviving siblings continued living in the home. The discovery triggered an investigation into how such a situation could exist undetected for so long. Neighbors, teachers, and others who interacted with the family hadn't realized two members were missing. Blair claimed her actions stemmed from allegations she made that the two victims had harmed a younger sibling. She tortured and ultimately ended their lives as punishment, justifying her actions as protection. However, investigators found no evidence supporting her allegations. Medical examinations of the surviving offspring showed no indication of what Blair claimed had occurred. What did the autopsies reveal? Examinations showed burns and trauma indicating sustained harm over time rather than isolated incidents. The victims had suffered before their deaths, enduring treatment that reflected Blair's rage and complete disregard for their well-being. The physical evidence contradicted any narrative of protection or justified response. Blair's unemployment and the absence of the fathers from the household created an environment where she had unchecked control. Financial stress combined with her personality created volatile conditions. Without outside oversight or regular welfare checks, she operated with impunity within her home. During confession and subsequent jail interviews, Blair expressed no remorse. She maintained that her actions were appropriate responses to what she claimed had happened. Her statements to investigators and media showed a complete lack of understanding about the wrongfulness of her actions or empathy for the victims. Blair stated directly, "I do not feel any remorse during proceedings," making clear her mindset. The absence of regret suggested either severe psychological issues or a personality that lacked normal human empathy. Psychologists who evaluated her found significant mental health concerns. The surviving offspring were removed from the home and placed in protective care. They have since been adopted and are reportedly thriving with therapy support, working through the trauma of living in a home where their siblings' bodies were stored. The psychological impact of such an environment requires ongoing professional intervention. Blair was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. The sentence reflected both the severity of her actions and the sustained nature of the harm inflicted. Michigan's justice system determined she represented ongoing danger that warranted permanent incarceration. Blair remains at Huron Valley Correctional Facility, serving her life sentence. Another mother would make headlines for attempting to abandon her offspring. Brittany Gosney.
Meaning that, you're yourself over by not telling me the whole truth here. You know what the happened to your boy. I know you know. Okay? Tell me what happened to your boy.
In February 2021, Brittany Gosney loaded her offspring into her vehicle in Middletown, Ohio, with a plan that would end in tragedy. Under pressure from her boyfriend James Hamilton, who reportedly didn't want the burden of raising someone else's offspring, Gosney decided to abandon them at a park. What followed would shock the community and expose the deadly consequences of adult selfishness. Gosney drove to Rush Run Wildlife Area with her 3 offspring. She left them there intending to drive away and leave them stranded. When one victim, James Hutchinson, chased after the vehicle trying to get back in, Gosney didn't stop. Instead, she continued driving, with James holding onto the vehicle until he fell and was dragged. The incident proved fatal. James sustained injuries from the dragging that caused his death. Rather than seek medical help or report what happened, Gosney retrieved James's body and, with Hamilton's help, disposed of it in the Ohio River. They weighted the body down, hoping the river would hide their crime. What led to their arrest? Days later, Gosney walked into the Middletown Police Department and confessed. The guilt or fear of discovery prompted her to admit what had happened. During interrogation, she provided details about the abandonment attempt, the dragging, and the disposal of James's body in the river. Interrogation recordings captured Gosney describing how she and Hamilton hog-tied the offspring before the abandonment attempt, showing premeditation. The restraints indicated planning beyond an impulsive decision. They had discussed and prepared for abandoning the offspring, making conscious choices at multiple points. Investigators recovered James's body from the Ohio River, confirming Gosney's account. The autopsy established the cause of death and the injuries sustained during the dragging. Physical evidence from the vehicle and the disposal site corroborated the timeline Gosney had provided. Hamilton faced charges for his role in the abandonment plan and body disposal. His pressure on Gosney to remove her offspring from their lives contributed to the decisions that led to James's death. Both faced serious criminal consequences for their actions. Gosney pleaded guilty to avoid trial, acknowledging responsibility for James's death. The guilty plea spared her remaining offspring from having to testify about what happened to their sibling. It also avoided a lengthy trial that would have required detailed testimony about the abandonment and disposal. In September 2021, Gosney was sentenced to 21 years to life in prison. The sentence meant she would serve a minimum of 21 years before parole eligibility, though the life portion meant she could remain incarcerated indefinitely. At sentencing, victim impact statements described James as a young person who deserved better from the adults responsible for his care. Principal Tracy Neely stated, "No sentence will bring James back, capturing the permanent loss experienced by James's school community." Teachers and classmates mourned a student who vanished from their lives because adults chose abandonment over responsibility. As of 2025, Gosney remains incarcerated in Ohio, serving her sentence. No new developments have altered her status. Hamilton received his own sentence for his role, though Gosney bore primary responsibility as the parent who made the final choices leading to James's death. The surviving offspring were placed in protective care, removed from both Gosney and Hamilton. They faced the trauma of losing their sibling and learning that their mother and her boyfriend caused his death. Professional support helps them process these events and build new lives. While that case involved attempted abandonment, another would expose systematic neglect. Sierra Day.
So she sat on the toilet. My dude was making a chicken noodle soup, and I was getting a little more ginger, and I put a little more Tylenol in the ginger a little bit. We noticed a boom, and I fell to the floor.
The wounds on Ania would be the next concern, and Day tries to explain those away by claiming Ania fell and hit the floor. The main problem with this story is that Ania wouldn't have hit the ground with enough force to cause that injury.
In March 2018, authorities in Euclid, Ohio, responded to reports about Ania Day Garrett's condition. What they discovered exposed months of systematic neglect and harm that had resulted in the young person's death. Sierra Day and her boyfriend Deontay Lewis faced charges that would reveal their complete disregard for Ania's well-being. Ania died from starvation and sustained harm, her body showing signs of prolonged deprivation. Medical examination revealed she had been denied adequate food while Day and Lewis maintained their own meals. The selectivity of the neglect, providing for themselves while starving Anaya, demonstrated intentional cruelty rather than poverty-driven inability. Forensic evidence showed bruising, internal injuries, and signs that the scene had been cleaned with bleach in an attempt to hide evidence. The cleaning suggested awareness that Ania's condition would trigger investigation if discovered. Day and Lewis knew what they were doing was wrong and attempted to conceal the extent of harm. Day had cognitive limitations that affected her functioning. However, prosecutors argued that she understood right from wrong sufficiently to be held accountable. Her conflicting stories to police about Anaya's final hours demonstrated attempts to avoid responsibility rather than genuine confusion about events. How did the investigation unfold? When authorities arrived, they found Ania's body and immediately recognized signs of neglect and harm. The condition of her remains told a story of suffering over time. Investigators documented the scene, including the evidence of cleaning attempts. Interviews with Day and Lewis revealed inconsistencies in their accounts. Day initially provided one version of events, then changed her story when confronted with contradictions. The shifting narratives suggested attempts to minimize her role or deflect blame onto Lewis. However, evidence showed both participated in the neglect that caused Anaya's death. Social services had prior involvement with the family, raising questions about missed opportunities for intervention. Caseworkers had documented concerns but hadn't removed Ania from the home. The failure to act decisively enough to prevent her death prompted reviews of child welfare procedures. Both Day and Lewis faced trial. The jury heard testimony about Ania's condition, the forensic evidence of starvation, and the attempts to clean the scene. Medical experts described the timeline of harm and how long Ania had suffered before death. The evidence painted a picture of sustained cruelty. Judge Timothy McCormick described their actions as showing callous disregard for human life during sentencing proceedings. The phrase captured the complete lack of care Day and Lewis demonstrated toward Ania's suffering. They had numerous opportunities to feed her, seek medical help, or surrender her to authorities if they couldn't care for her properly. Both Day and Lewis received life sentences without possibility of parole. But another case would involve a landfill search that captured national attention. Leilani Simon.
Was last night abnormal for wanting to cry as much as he did last night?
No, he said he wasn't trying. He was not letting you out. Lou. That's what he does. He did that and it got quiet 10:30. About 10:30 and looked over there and he was knocked out.
In October 2022, Quinton Simon was reported missing from his Savannah, Georgia home. His mother, Leilani Simon, claimed he had vanished from his playpen. The case would evolve from a missing person investigation into a homicide case involving one of the most extensive searches in Georgia history. Simon had ended Quinton's life and disposed of his body in a dumpster, which meant his remains were transported to a landfill. Investigators faced the daunting task of searching tons of refuse to find evidence. The landfill search lasted weeks, with teams methodically examining waste until they recovered remains consistent with Quinton's physical characteristics. Simon's struggles with substances created an unstable environment. Her drug issues and resentment toward parenting responsibilities contributed to circumstances that led to Quinton's death. Family members later testified about Simon's childhood trauma, attempting to provide context for her actions, though acknowledging that trauma didn't justify harming Quinton. What evidence connected Simon to Quinton's death? Video surveillance and text message records helped investigators piece together the timeline. Footage showed Simon's movements on the day Quinton disappeared, including trips to locations where she disposed of evidence. Text messages revealed her state of mind and communications with others that contradicted her public claims about Quinton's disappearance. Despite the extensive landfill search recovering remains, the condition of the body prevented determining an exact cause of death. However, the totality of evidence, the disposal, the lies, the timeline, convinced prosecutors they could prove Simon had ended Quentin's life even without establishing precisely how. During investigation and trial, Simon blamed others for Quentin's disappearance, suggesting various theories that deflected responsibility from herself. She maintained these alternative narratives despite evidence contradicting them. The refusal to accept responsibility continued through her conviction. The jury convicted Simon on all counts after reviewing the evidence of disposal, false statements, and the circumstances surrounding Quentin's disappearance. The verdict reflected their determination that Simon was responsible for her son's death and the callous disposal of his body. In November 2024, Simon was sentenced to life in prison with possibility of parole plus 10 additional years. The parole possibility meant she would serve a minimum term before eligibility, though the life component could keep her incarcerated indefinitely depending on parole board decisions. Simon's mother, Billie Jo Howell, stated, "I failed her as a mom during proceedings, expressing regret that she hadn't better prepared Simon for parenting or addressed issues that led to tragedy." The statement reflected a family grappling with both Quentin's loss and Simon's responsibility. In September 2025, Simon filed an amended motion for a new trial, citing claims of prejudice and legal errors. The motion argued that various aspects of her trial were unfair, though courts would need to evaluate whether these claims had merit sufficient to warrant overturning her conviction. Simon remains incarcerated at Pulaski State Prison in Georgia, serving her sentence while her legal team pursues appeals. The next case would involve a mother's confession to unthinkable acts. Madison McDonald.
I stayed with them for a little bit because I didn't want to leave this. But they can't keep getting hurt. I've tried to get help so many times.
Let me ask you this. Were your kids sexually assaulted or...
I have strong reason to believe, and I've been fighting to prove it.
In November 2021, Madison McDonald walked into a Denton County, Texas police station with a confession that horrified officers. She calmly reported that she had ended the lives of her two young daughters, Lillian Mae McDonald and Archer Hammond. The confession began an investigation into what had driven a mother to such extreme actions. McDonald had sedated and then smothered her daughters in their Irving home. The method showed planning. She obtained sedatives to make them unconscious before proceeding. The premeditation contradicted any narrative of spontaneous breakdown or momentary loss of control. McDonald struggled with untreated mental health conditions that had worsened over time. She experienced paranoia and delusions that distorted her perception of reality. However, the key question became whether these mental health issues prevented her from understanding her actions were wrong, or whether she knew exactly what she was doing. During her confession, McDonald stated, "I deserve to be arrested," demonstrating awareness that her actions warranted legal consequences. This statement became crucial in evaluating her mental state. Someone completely detached from reality typically wouldn't recognize they should face arrest. The legal proceedings focused heavily on McDonald's mental competency. Her defense team argued that severe mental illness had impaired her judgment to the point where she couldn't be held fully responsible. They presented evidence of her deteriorating mental health in the period before the deaths. What did psychiatric experts determine? Psychiatrist testimony confirmed that while McDonald had serious mental health issues, she was aware her actions were wrongful. The expert evaluation found that despite her paranoia and delusions, she retained enough understanding to know that ending her daughters' lives was wrong and would result in criminal consequences. This awareness distinguished her case from insanity defenses, where defendants genuinely cannot comprehend the nature of their actions. McDonald's confession and her statement about deserving arrest showed cognitive understanding, even if her emotional state was severely compromised. The prosecution argued that her methodical approach, obtaining sedatives, waiting for them to take effect, then proceeding with suffocation, demonstrated rational planning incompatible with complete mental incapacity. Each step required decision-making and execution that suggested retained cognitive function. MacDonald was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. The sentence reflected the court's determination that despite her mental health challenges, she bore criminal responsibility for her daughter's deaths. Texas's harshest penalty ensured she would never be released. In 2025, MacDonald's legal team filed an appeal challenging evidence and procedures from her trial. The appeal argued various legal issues, though courts would need to evaluate whether these claims warranted overturning her conviction. The appeals process continues as her attorneys explore grounds for a new trial or reduced sentence. MacDonald remains in a Texas correctional facility, serving her life sentence. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The next case would cross the Atlantic to the UK. Louise Porton. In January and February 2018, Louise Porton ended the lives of her two young daughters in Rugby, England. Lexi Draper and Scarlett Vaughn died just weeks apart, both from suffocation. Porton's motivation would shock investigators and the public alike when the full picture emerged during trial. Porton worked as a model and in the sex industry, pursuits she prioritized over parenting. Her daughters became obstacles to the lifestyle she wanted to maintain. Phone records and online searches revealed her mindset in the period before the deaths. Porton had searched online for information about how to cause death through suffocation, demonstrating premeditation. The searches occurred before both deaths, showing this wasn't spontaneous but rather calculated. She researched methods and then applied that knowledge to her daughters. After Lexi's death in January 2018, Porton claimed the young person had stopped breathing unexpectedly. Medical professionals initially couldn't determine a definitive cause, and Lexi's death was treated as potentially natural or accidental. Porton received sympathy and support from those around her who believed she was a grieving mother. Why didn't the first death trigger more scrutiny? Without obvious signs of harm and no clear cause of death, authorities had limited basis to suspect foul play. Suffocation can be difficult to detect forensically, especially when no other injuries are present. Porton's performance as a distraught mother convinced those who interacted with her that she was a victim of tragic circumstances. Just 18 days after Lexi's death, Scarlett died in nearly identical circumstances. Porton again claimed the young person had stopped breathing without warning. This time, the pattern raised immediate red flags. 2 deaths in one household within weeks demanded investigation. Medical experts re-examined both cases, looking for connections. The similar circumstances and timing made coincidence unlikely. Investigators obtained Porton's phone records and discovered the searches about suffocation. They also found evidence of her social life continuing uninterrupted between and after the deaths. During the funeral for her daughters, witnesses reported Porton laughing, behavior that struck mourners as inappropriate for someone grieving 2 losses. The disconnect between expected maternal grief and her actual demeanor added to growing suspicions about her involvement. What sealed the case against her? Text messages and app usage showed Porton arranging meetings for her work activities during times when her daughters needed care. The messages revealed frustration that parenting interfered with her ability to maintain her lifestyle and income. One particularly damning message showed her prioritizing a client meeting over her daughter's well-being. Porton was arrested and charged with both deaths. During trial, prosecutors presented the online searches, the suspicious timing, the text messages, and expert testimony about the pattern of suffocation. The defense attempted to argue that both deaths were natural or accidental, but evidence overwhelmingly contradicted this narrative. In August 2019, Porton was convicted on both counts. The jury determined she had deliberately suffocated both daughters because they interfered with her desired lifestyle. The verdict reflected their conclusion that she valued her career and social life more than her offspring's lives. During proceedings, evidence emerged that Porton had told someone, "I gave you life, I can take it away," a chilling statement that revealed her sense of ownership over her daughters. The phrase suggested she viewed them as possessions rather than individuals with rights to life and safety. Porton was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 32 years before parole eligibility. The lengthy minimum reflected the calculated nature of both killings and the vulnerability of the victims. The judge emphasized that Porton had placed her selfish interests above the most basic parental duty of protecting offspring. Porton is currently serving her sentence at Fawston Hall Prison in Derbyshire, England. She will be in her 50s before any possibility of parole consideration. The case sparked discussions in the UK about warning signs when parents view offspring as burdens rather than responsibilities. Another case would involve a mother in Arizona who staged a horrific scene. Rachel Henry.
I wanted to go outside. I want to do this, I want to do that. You said I couldn't be seen by Francisco. You said I couldn't go to the store because all the babies, this and that. And I mean, I was trapped in a house. I felt like I was going crazy.
In January 2020, first responders in Phoenix, Arizona arrived at a home to find a scene they would never forget. 3 young victims were arranged on a couch, positioned as if sleeping. Rachel Henry, their mother, had called authorities herself, but what she reported didn't match the reality investigators discovered. Henry had ended the lives of her 3 offspring through suffocation. Zane Henry, Mariah Henry, and Catalaya Rios had been placed carefully on furniture after their deaths, staged to appear peaceful. The arrangement suggested Henry had spent time with their bodies after the acts, positioning them with apparent care that contrasted sharply with the violence of suffocation. Henry struggled with substances that affected her judgment and mental state. Her personal struggles and involvement with drugs contributed to circumstances that led to the deaths, though they didn't excuse her choices. She made decisions to harm her offspring rather than seek help for her difficulties. What led to her confession? Henry contacted police herself, making statements that initially seemed like a mother reporting a tragedy. However, as investigators examined the scene and questioned her further, inconsistencies emerged in her account. Medical examination of the victims revealed they hadn't died naturally, as Henry suggested. During interrogation, Henry admitted to suffocating her offspring, providing details about how she had ended each life. The confession came relatively quickly, suggesting either guilt overwhelming her ability to maintain deception or recognition that evidence would expose her regardless. The staging of the bodies raised questions about Henry's mental state. Why arrange them on the couch? What was she thinking during the time between their deaths and when she called authorities? Psychologists who evaluated her attempted to understand the disconnect between the violence of suffocation and the apparently tender positioning afterward. Henry faced trial in Maricopa County, Arizona. Rather than mount an extensive defense, she entered guilty pleas, acknowledging responsibility for all 3 deaths. The guilty pleas avoided a lengthy trial that would have required detailed testimony about each victim's final moments. The plea agreement didn't provide much insight into Henry's specific motivations. Unlike some cases where defendants explain their reasoning, Henry's guilty plea focused on accepting legal consequences rather than offering justifications. The lack of detailed motive explanation left observers with questions about what drove her to such extremes. In February 2025, Henry was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, 1 for each victim. The consecutive nature meant the sentences stacked rather than running concurrently, emphasizing that 3 separate lives were taken. Arizona's sentencing reflected the irreversible harm caused to 3 vulnerable individuals. Family members released a statement saying justice was served following sentencing, expressing some satisfaction that Henry would spend life incarcerated. However, they acknowledged that no sentence could restore the 3 young lives lost or undo the trauma created by Henry's actions. Henry remains in an Arizona correctional facility, serving her consecutive life sentences. But the next case would involve religious delusions and multiple victims. Lori Vallow Daybell.
And they called and she said, "Oh, I have a story for you. These people killed their spouses so they could get married," which was totally a rumor,
I don't think
totally
that's true,
untrue, and then you ran with it.
Between 2019 and 2020, Lori Vallow Daybell orchestrated a series of deaths driven by what she claimed were religious beliefs about the end times. Her offspring, J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan, disappeared in September 2019. Their remains would later be discovered buried on property belonging to Vallow's husband, Chad Daybell, in Idaho. Vallow had become involved with doomsday religious beliefs that classified people as light or dark. She claimed her offspring had become dark and needed to be eliminated to protect others and fulfill religious prophecies. These beliefs, shared with Daybell, provided the twisted justification for actions that resulted in multiple deaths. JJ was found to have died from asphyxiation, his body wrapped in plastic and tape. Tylee's remains showed she had been dismembered and burned, an attempt to destroy evidence and conceal her death. The condition of the remains indicated deliberate actions to hide what had occurred. The investigation into the disappearances began when extended family members couldn't locate the offspring. Vallow initially claimed they were staying with others or traveling, providing various stories that didn't hold up under scrutiny. When investigators pressed for proof of the offspring's safety, Vallow and Daybell fled to Hawaii. What else connected Vallow to suspicious deaths? Vallow's previous husband, Charles Vallow, had been shot and killed by Vallow's brother, Alex Cox, in July 2019, just months before the offspring disappeared. The shooting was initially ruled self-defense, but investigators later questioned this conclusion. Cox himself died in December 2019 under circumstances that raised suspicions. Chad Daybell's previous wife, Tammy Daybell, died suddenly in October 2019, shortly before Chad married Vallow. Tammy's death had been attributed to natural causes, but authorities exhumed her body after the offspring's remains were found. Autopsy revealed she had been asphyxiated, not died naturally as initially believed. The pattern of deaths surrounding Vallow and Daybell became impossible to ignore. People who stood between the couple or whom they viewed as obstacles died under suspicious circumstances. Financial motives also emerged, with life insurance policies on some victims and Social Security benefits collected for deceased offspring. Vallow faced trial in Idaho for the deaths of her offspring and conspiracy in Tammy Daybell's death. Throughout proceedings, she maintained that no one was murdered, insisting her religious beliefs justified her actions. The delusions appeared genuine to her, but were recognized by courts as dangerous rationalizations for deadly acts. In 2023, Vallow was convicted on all counts and sentenced to multiple life terms without possibility of parole. The sentences ran consecutively, ensuring she would never be released. Idaho's justice system determined her religious claims didn't excuse or justify the deaths she caused and conspired to cause. Chad Daybell faced separate trial and was also convicted, receiving a death sentence for his role in the deaths. The couple who had claimed to be carrying out divine will were held fully accountable by the secular justice system. In 2025, Vallow gave interviews continuing to deny wrongdoing, maintaining her religious narratives despite conviction. Her inability or unwillingness to accept reality demonstrated either continued delusion or calculated attempt to avoid full accountability. Mental health evaluations found her competent to stand trial, meaning she understood proceedings even if she rejected the court's authority. Vallow remains in an Idaho prison, serving her life sentences. While that case involved religious delusions, another would center on fear and an incestuous relationship. Sarah Barris. In May 2019, authorities in Sheffield, England, responded to reports of an incident at the Barris household. What they discovered exposed a plot that had resulted in the deaths of 2 young people and attempts on others in the family. Sarah Barris and her half-brother Brandon Moshin, with whom she had an incestuous relationship that produced 6 offspring, had decided to end their lives. The pair feared that social services would remove the offspring from their care, discovering the incestuous nature of their relationship. Rather than face this possibility, they chose to eliminate what they viewed as evidence of their relationship. Tristan and Blake Barris died from the plot, while 4 other offspring survived attempts on their lives. The methods included strangulation and attempts to poison with medication. The sustained nature of the plot, multiple attempts on multiple victims over time, demonstrated planning rather than impulse. Barris had herself experienced a troubled upbringing marked by difficulties that shaped her adult dysfunction. The incestuous relationship with Moshin represented another layer of pathology that had produced offspring they ultimately viewed as liabilities rather than responsibilities. What evidence exposed the full extent of the plot? The surviving offspring provided accounts of what had occurred, describing attempts on their lives and witnessing what happened to their siblings. Their testimonies became crucial in establishing that this wasn't an accident or isolated incident, but rather a coordinated plan to eliminate the entire family. Physical evidence supported the accounts, including medications used in poisoning attempts and forensic analysis of the strangulation deaths. Text messages between Barris and Moshin discussed their plans and fears about social services intervention. The communications showed both were actively participating in decisions to harm their offspring. During proceedings, evidence emerged that Barris had stated, "I gave you life, I can take it away," the same chilling phrase used by Louise Porton in an unrelated case. The statement revealed how some perpetrators view offspring as possessions, rather than individuals with independent rights to life. Barris and Moshin both faced trial. Rather than mount a defense, they pleaded guilty to all charges, acknowledging responsibility for the deaths and attempts. The guilty pleas spared the surviving offspring from having to testify in detail about their trauma. In November 2019, Barris was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years before parole eligibility. Moshin received a similar sentence. The judge emphasized that Barris had betrayed the most fundamental duty of protecting offspring, instead orchestrating their deaths to avoid consequences of her incestuous relationship. The surviving 4 offspring were removed from the household and placed in protective care. They faced the trauma of losing siblings and learning that their mother and father figure had tried to end their lives as well. Intensive therapy helps them process these events, though the psychological impact will persist. Barris remains incarcerated in England, serving her sentence. Her earliest possible parole date would come when she's in her 70s, though the nature of her crimes makes release uncertain even then. Another case would shock Germany with its scope. Christian K. In September 2020, emergency responders in Solingen, Germany, discovered 5 young victims in an apartment. Christian K., whose full name is protected under German privacy laws, had ended the lives of 5 of her 6 offspring before attempting to take her own life at a train station. The victims ranged in age across early childhood years. Christian had used drowning and suffocation as methods, attacking each victim separately over time in the family apartment. The systematic nature of moving from one victim to the next demonstrated sustained intent rather than a brief breakdown. Christian's oldest offspring, who survived because they were not at home, became a key witness to understanding the family dynamics before the deaths. This survivor provided context about their mother's state of mind and the circumstances in the household that preceded the tragedy. What drove Christiane to such extreme actions? Reports suggested personal turmoil and relationship issues had contributed to her deteriorating mental state. She had been dealing with challenges as a single parent, managing 6 offspring without adequate support. However, the decision to end 5 lives represented choices that went beyond simply being overwhelmed. Christiane had sedated some victims before proceeding, similar to other cases where perpetrators used medication to reduce resistance. The procurement and use of sedatives showed planning and awareness of what she intended to do. After ending the lives of her 5 offspring, Christiane traveled to Dusseldorf and threw herself in front of a train. The attempt was unsuccessful, leaving her alive to face consequences. Her survival meant prosecutors could pursue charges, though her mental state became a central issue in legal proceedings. German authorities charged Christiane with 5 counts related to the deaths. Mental health evaluations examined whether she was competent to stand trial and whether mental illness affected her culpability. The evaluations found that while she had mental health challenges, she understood her actions. During trial, Christiane showed no remorse for her actions, maintaining positions that suggested either continued mental health issues or inability to face what she had done. The absence of expressed regret troubled court observers and the victim's extended family. The judge described her actions as malicious during sentencing, emphasizing the deliberate nature of ending 5 separate lives. The verdict reflected the court's determination that Christiane bore criminal responsibility regardless of her personal difficulties. Christiane was sentenced to life in prison under German law. Life sentences in Germany typically involve a minimum of 15 years before parole consideration, though particularly serious cases can result in indefinite incarceration. The number of victims and their vulnerability made this case exceptionally grave. The surviving offspring faces the trauma of losing 5 siblings to their mother's actions. German authorities placed this survivor in protective care, providing support to process the incomprehensible loss. The survivor's future involves building a life while carrying the weight of what happened to their family. Christiane remains incarcerated in Germany, serving her life sentence. The final case would involve a stepmother and an extensive cover-up. Laetitia Stauch. In January 2020, Gannon Stauch disappeared from his Colorado Springs home. His stepmother, Laetitia Stauch, initially claimed he had left the house and not returned. The story would unravel over months, exposing lies, a cross-country manhunt for his body, and the truth about what Laetitia had done. Gannon had been stabbed, shot, and his body transported across multiple states before being disposed of in Florida. The extreme measures Laetitia took to hide evidence demonstrated awareness that what she'd done was wrong and determination to avoid consequences. Laetitia's relationship with Gannon had been troubled. She claimed he had behavioral issues and that she was struggling to manage him. However, investigators would discover evidence suggesting systematic mistreatment that preceded his death. The narrative she presented of a difficult stepchild didn't match the reality of a young person subjected to sustained harm. What broke open the investigation? Surveillance video from a neighbor's camera showed Laetitia leaving the house with Gannon on the day he disappeared, but she returned alone. The footage contradicted her claim that Gannon had left on his own. When confronted with this evidence, Laetitia changed her story multiple times, each new version contradicting the previous one. As the investigation intensified, Laetitia created increasingly elaborate explanations. She claimed Gannon had been kidnapped, that someone else was responsible, that she was being framed. The fabricated stories and constantly shifting narratives raised obvious red flags about her credibility. Gannon's body was eventually discovered in Florida, hidden in a suitcase under a bridge. The location was far from Colorado, requiring investigators to piece together Letitia's travels and how she transported the body across state lines. Rental car records, phone data, and witness accounts helped establish her movements. Forensic evidence from the Colorado home revealed blood evidence that had been cleaned but remained detectable. The attempted cleanup showed Letitia knew Gannon had been harmed in the house and tried to conceal it. DNA analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Gannon. Letitia faced trial in Colorado. Her defense team pursued an insanity argument, claiming she wasn't mentally competent when Gannon died. However, prosecutors presented evidence of extensive planning and cover-up that contradicted claims of mental incapacity. What sealed her fate? The jury heard about the surveillance video, the body disposal across state lines, the cleaned blood evidence, and Letitia's numerous false statements. Mental health experts testified about evaluations, with prosecution experts concluding she understood her actions despite any mental health issues. In May 2023, the jury convicted Letitia on all counts, rejecting the insanity defense. The verdict reflected their determination that she knew what she was doing and made calculated choices to harm Gannon and hide evidence. During sentencing, the judge noted Letitia showed no remorse for her actions, maintaining various stories rather than accepting responsibility. Her continued denials and blame shifting demonstrated either inability or unwillingness to acknowledge what she had done. Letitia was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, plus additional years for related charges. Colorado's harshest sentence ensured she would never be released, spending the remainder of her life incarcerated for Gannon's death. Letitia remains in a Colorado correctional facility, serving her life sentence. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.